Hello and welcome to the Extraordinary Retirement Podcast with your hosts, Gregg and Indovina and Nate Yeomans. I'm Wendy McConnell. Hey guys, how are you?
We are
Doing great,
fantastic,
Wendy.
Wendy. How are
Oh,
you?
it's good. It's good. It's always good to see your smiling faces.
Yeah, you too.
Absolutely.
We have a good one for you today, Wendy.
Oh, yeah.
We're excited about this one.
What are we talking about?
Yes.
Oh, the psychology of spending money in
Uh-oh.
retirement. Yeah,
I
great
feel like
topic.
I'm going to be put on blast on this one.
Here we go.
That's right. Get ready, because if you can't spend, we're gonna help you figure out a way to get that done. But it's definitely a topic that impacts every single retiree out there, of just navigating that psychological challenge of, holy cow, I have saved all my life, and now I'm supposed to
Wow.
spend this money.
Yeah.
Yeah. How
Feels
many times,
different.
Nate? How many times have we sat down with somebody and say, "You have a spending problem," and they look at us like, "What do you mean you have a
What?
spend? You don't spend enough."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not a problem for me. So actually, I guess I'm good for this one.
Good. You're gonna fall right in the line here, Wendy.
All
Love it.
right. So what are the things we need to keep in mind then?
Well, I think to kind of get things started, is let's just recap kind of the stages of life that we go through. So, and we're going to kind of really define, where does all this come from? Why are we savers by nature, and where does that get deep rooted? But to kick things off, we just got to think about the stages of life that you go through. Most retirees have spent probably 40 years or more of their life in the accumulation phase.
Yeah.
Save, 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 save. And now they're transitioning into the deaccumulation phase of their life. It's very difficult for people just to flip a switch and convert right over into going from a saver that's really ingrained to a spender overnight.
And Nate,
And
remember
that's what
also
it boils down to.
during that accumulation phase, you're spending your income, right?
That's
You're not
right.
spending your savings. It's easy to
Yeah.
spend. It's easy to spend when you know you got a check coming every other week.
Right.
Now, when that check goes away and you got this pile of money, that's when the psychology of spending really kicks in. And there's a great quote that's unknown. I wish we knew who it came from, but it says the two biggest challenges are getting young people to save and older people to spend.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into some of the psychology of that, but I think that's a great kickoff. The different stages of life, going into that spending or deaccumulation, where you're not relying on an income from your work. You're relying on your savings for retirement, and everything changes.
So
So
That's right.
what's the big problem with not spending enough? What you're saying is not spending enough. Is it the lack of an extraordinary retirement?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, that's, we'll get into this in a little bit, but one of the big things is that we're also wired not to set ourselves up for regret. But a lot of times, people, what they're doing is they're ingrained savers. They can't translate what they've worked their entire life for and save for into, how do I spend that money to create fulfillment in my life? And they're heading towards being the richest person in the graveyard, and that's not what we want, right? Is you don't want to end up taking all this money and accumulating the most amount of money you've ever had in your life until the day you die. It is that figuring out, how do I transition into creating purpose out of this money. And we're going to get into some of those practical steps to help people figure out, how do I make the transition? Because I think that if we start with, where are the roots of this coming from? Well, this is deep embedded in us. It actually starts from the beginning, when we were hunters and gatherers. If you think about it, all our life, it was ingrained into us, especially early on in this world, to where people had to go out and hunt and gather food, and they had to save for winter and all of these things. So, this goes back way, way, way beyond our times, to really instill this core value and this innate nature in us to be savers. and you can't just flip that switch overnight and convert it.
Yeah, and if you ate all of your resources and didn't quote unquote save for a rainy day, you didn't survive, right? So our ancestors who did survive are the ones that got good at surviving by not spending everything that they've accumulated, right? So
We
that's
wouldn't be
part of
here
it.
today if they didn't, right?
Yeah. And
We
here's the other
wouldn't be.
big psychological thing about money is, so every dollar that you have saved for retirement, where did that come from? Typically, for most people, it came from work. The blood, sweat, and tears of work, and then you save, 10% or whatever you've saved. Those little digital dollars that show up in your Fidelity account or whatever, for most people, they represent pain, right? The savings, how much life energy did you have to expend to accumulate X amount of dollars, right? So now you're looking at that, and it becomes so emotional to spend it, or
Right.
or this is not the topic of today's podcast, but or to lose it in speculative investments, et cetera, right? So that's probably the source. A lot of it, besides the evolutionary part of it, is you trade your life's energy for this money, and it becomes super, super emotional.
Yep. And then the financial industry as a whole, if we really look at it, is we are very good at, or the industry is very good at reinforcing that mindset of accumulate, save, invest, accumulate, save, invest, right? All of those things and so we're just reinforcing that mindset and that behavior. And again, if you're doing that for 30, 40 years, that has some pretty deep roots to that mindset. And so it's
Yeah.
really about breaking that down. And what it really boils down to as well is at the end of the day, why do people not want to hold on to something and not spend it? It's because of the fear of the unknown, right?
Yeah.
What's around the corner that I don't know about? And, what's interesting is that, if we look at the fact that, people have again spent all this time saving. And if you look at the research, the studies would show, in fact, there's a study out there that looked at 2,000 retirees. Okay. And it surveyed those retirees, and 4 out of 10 said that they planned on spending their assets down. But what about the other 6 out of 10? So they wanted to know, why would you not spend your assets down? And the number one reason was they wanted to save for the unforeseen future. So here are retirees saying we wanted to save for the unforeseen future. That is really reinforcing the fact that the fear of the unknown is driving a lot of these decisions and inability to spend in retirement, because we don't know what's around the corner when it comes to different things like, what if I have a healthcare event? What if the stock market goes down? What if inflation runs higher than what I expected? What if I live longer than I planned to? All of these what ifs are going off in our head. And so we become very, very latched on to our money, afraid to spend it because of those what ifs.
Absolutely. Yeah, and typically the people that we meet with, there's a classic book out called The Millionaire Next Door, and it's the person that you never would expect to be a millionaire, but they've just lived such a frugal life. And as Nate mentioned earlier, how do you flip that switch from frugality to fun,
Right.
when it's just been ingrained in you and it's been treating you well for 40 years, and now you got to flip that switch with all of these unknowns that Nate just said. How long am I going to live? Is my purchasing power going to hold up? What if I have a healthcare event? What if the market doesn't do as well as all of those things, right? So what we really need to do is begin to reframe our thinking and our view on what money is. And let's talk about that for a second. We hold money in such high regard, and I outlined some of the reasons, and Nate did as well, as to why we place so much value on money. But what is money? Money is just a informal agreement amongst a society, right? Is it real? Think about that for a second. And well, it is real as long as somebody accepts it as being real. And the other parts of money is that every day that you hoard and hang on to money, it loses its purchasing power for you. Since 1913, the value of the US dollar has gone down by over 99%. 99%. That's huge. And people think of inflation, and people think that inflation's at 2.5% because that's the government. That's what the government tells us it is. What you really need to look at is what is the growth in the money supply? Because as the money supply grows, the value of the money that exists in the financial system and exists in your retirement account loses purchasing power. And that historically is more like 7%, not what the government tells us at 2.5%. The first thing you have to think about is saving and hoarding and holding money. Every day that you do that, if you're not keeping up with the inflationary aspects, it's losing its utility every single day. That's the first point to start to talk about.
Yeah. So I think that if we can tie that into the fact that these dollars are more valuable to us today than they will be in the future, what we really have to reframe here is what is the purpose? What is the purpose of this money? And we like to really think about how to get intentional with your spending. And if we think about, we've got a deeply embedded mindset of saving. And if your purpose for spending that money and creating lifetime experiences and translating that money into fulfillment, and seeing the impact that it can have on you and the people around you and the causes that you believe in and all of that, if that's not greater than that root source of the desire to save, you're going to have a really hard time spending. Right. And so we've got to figure out ways to say, how do we look at the purpose of this money and what fulfills you in life to make sure that that drive is greater than your desire to latch on and to save. And that takes intentionality. Okay. I think that we have to be very, very intentional. And I think one of the great ways to do this, and we've talked about this a lot, Gregg, is create a timeline. Why would somebody want to create a timeline around their spending, Gregg?
Well, it's intentionality. That's the first thing. Whenever you put something to paper, that's important. But we talk about this in retirement class we teach. There are phases of retirement that you can do certain things. The first 10 years is referred to by many people as the go-go years. Right. So there's intentional spending that you can do during those go-go years that maybe you're not going to be able to do during the slow go. And then eventually when you get into your 80s and 90s, maybe the no-go years. And so that's important as well. So that also ties into the utility of money having its highest utility today. The spending has its highest utility in the first 10 years of retirement, because that's when you're able to physically do a lot of the things that you may want to be doing. So they tie together.
So that timeline, what it's going to do is, create that little sense of urgency. If that, okay, I'm retired and this next 10 or 12 years of my life are really going to be the go-go years, assuming my health stays where I think it's going to be and we're going to be good. Let's get busy. Let's start really being intentional about making sure that we maximize those experiences, because I mentioned it earlier, is that we are also wired to not live with regret. And so a lot of times what we coach our clients on is, can we begin with the end in mind? That your retirement is a blank sheet of paper. And if you were, let's say, 95 years old, sitting there and looking back, what would you regret that you missed out on?
Yeah.
What are the things that you would look back and say, those were the important things? I am so glad that I did these things or experienced that or watched somebody blossom because of something I did to help them, or whatever the case may be. But what would be the thing that you would say, oh, I really missed out on that? I should have done that. Right. And if we can start with that mindset and then back into it and then create an intentional plan of spending with a timeline associated with that, I think people can really start to make that mental shift and have the drive and the desire to spend. And that will eventually starts to gain a little bit of traction. There's a saying that, behavior in motion stays in motion.
Yeah. Just get
And
started.
right.
Yep.
And no different than the saving aspect. Greg alluded to it earlier. It's like one of the hardest things we can get young people to do is save. But eventually, it's why we always say, get into a habit early on of paying yourself first and saving first, because that habit starts to reinforce itself. We got to kind of reverse that now, right? We've got to start small and maybe start with the action items that will get you into those habits. But over time, you'll start getting more and more comfortable with spending what you've worked so hard for and translating that into fulfillment in retirement.
Nate, tell the story that you mentioned yesterday in one of our client meetings about the timeline that was set up for giving money to nieces and nephews. Do you remember that?
Yes, this is
and the excitement and this is the intentionality portion and finding your purpose. If you figure out what's important to you, and in this particular case, it was blessing nieces and nephews and seeing that growth over time through these investments. But tell that story briefly. I think it's important.
So first, I'll tell the story by this was a seed that was planted, I think, well over a year ago. All right, and so this is something that has kind of started to gain some traction, and it really started with the fact that this really amazing couple that have done all the right things, and they are at that stage to where they realize, as I've helped them out to understand, you're never going to run out of money. Running out of money is not an issue. And they start to ask, okay, well, what is this money for? Now they happen to not have any children. And so, leaving money to their kids is not an option for them. And we really start talking about, okay, what are the things that you can do in your life that you're going to look back and say, oh, I am so glad that we did that. And, they talked about, well, I said, who's this money for if you're not here? And they said, well, we're going to leave it to our nieces and nephews. And it was a real simple question after that. Would you rather give to them with a warm hand or a cold hand? And they never forgot that. That is exactly what he said to me yesterday. He said, Nate, I never forgot what you said, is would we rather give with a warm hand or a cold hand? And he handed me his spreadsheet with all of the nieces and nephews and an intentional giving plan for the next dozen or so years that they're going to be giving into their lives. And they just started this, by the way, and the reaction that they're getting is really, really exciting to them. And they're watching them see, oh my gosh, they were so excited and so thankful. We got the nicest card in the mail and the thank you note. And
free money. Who'd have thought?
yeah, but they get to, and that's what I said, is that you would never have gotten that fulfillment, that feeling if you're dead.
Yeah.
Right. And the fact that you get to experience that now, it is equally, if not more, fulfilling for the person doing the giving than maybe the one even receiving.
And those dividends are just starting. What they're going to see over the next 10 years, and then even beyond that, how that investment into those children's lives is going to manifest.
Right.
There's going to be a 10x return, and they're going to be able to see it.
Right.
And experience.
And you felt that yourself personally, Greg, as a young man growing up, and how your parents, helped you with your first place to house to buy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So those things early on, and we talk about this a lot in our retirement class, is that, look, we realize that, with a responsible spending plan that's well thought out, that's intentional, that takes in the other factors of the unknown that we can be planned for and understood, If all those things can be done right, then I think it increases people's desire to get out there and spend, or to give, and to see the fruits of that giving while they're alive. And so that's really exciting to be a part of.
Let's jump into the practical steps, Nate. Most people that we meet with, they don't have the visibility into any financial plan to give them the confidence, even if they've identified their purpose and what they want to do in their spending.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of all those unknowns and the inability to have visibility into what the impact of those potential bad things, like living too long or inflation being higher or bad portfolio or whatever. This is where financial planning comes into the situation of providing retirees the information so that they can make good decisions, because without good information, you're going to be paralyzed by that fear.
That's right. Yeah. And when people can't see it, then it magnifies the fear of the unknown, right? I mean, that's why some people are scared of the dark, because I can't see what's out there. I have no visibility.
Are you afraid of the dark, Nate? Do you sub the nightlight?
I've gotten over that, Greg.
Okay.
Don't bring it up. Just kidding.
Why we love them.
Yeah, that's right. But, at the end of the day, it is really creating that visibility and understanding the important details behind the plan, to say, okay, this is well thought out. I understand that if life throws me these different curveballs, which we oftentimes say, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and what the heck are you going to do about it? When we have plans that are built to say, okay, here's how we're going to navigate the waters of retirement and these icebergs that are floating out there that you potentially could run into, and then they can see they're spending right through those things, then all of a sudden, again, it starts to instill some confidence and some belief. But we still want to make sure that we kind of start to ease them into that mentality, and over time it gains momentum. And so I think that it does become an important piece to make sure that you understand how to do that. And there's a few different approaches. I mean, I think the industry is very familiar with something called the 4% rule. So that's one practical way that you can look at, how do I take income out of my account that should last me through my retirement. And the 4% rule really comes from a gentleman named William Bengen that really looked at understanding different 30-year time periods and going back and looking at history. And there's a lot of dynamics that I can't go into on this podcast about the study, but it was really looking at the data behind it, with the idea of getting to a end result of what is a reasonably safe withdrawal rate that somebody can take out of their portfolio, and that money should last them through their retirement. And that's essentially the foundation of the 4% rule. And so we can use that as a starting point to say, okay, what's a good starting point of how much you can take? Now, what Greg and I would tell you is that we don't believe that people's spending stays static throughout their life. Obviously there's inflation, but spending should be, I think, pulled forward and heavier in the earlier years of your plan, while you have your health and the energy to go out and do the things that you want to do, because the reality is spending goes down over time.
Yeah.
As we age, our lifestyle starts to decrease. Maybe our healthcare expense goes up a little bit, but it's kind of offset by the decrease in lifestyle. And so we really look at it and say, yeah, I understand the principles of a 4% rule, but maybe it's for the first few years of retirement, maybe it's the 7% rule. And then it works into the 6%, 5%. And over time, it starts to gradually ease down as your lifestyle starts to change with it a little bit, because we're aging. And we're really focused on how do we pull income forward in a retirement plan.
Yeah. And then there's the idea of the 4% rule is a static approach, right? So you just take a static 4% initially and then adjust for inflation over time. we're more in the camp of having a dynamic approach, because the two bad outcomes with your wealth in retirement is that you run out of money before you run out of life, and everyone's fearful of that. And then the other one,
acceptable.
not acceptable. But the other one is not acceptable in my mind as well, is you don't spend enough and you get to the end of your life and you have more net worth than you did at age 65, and you have that regret that Nate was talking about, which leads us to a dynamic approach. And we don't have time to get into this guardrail system, but there are financial approaches that give you a high probability of not running out of money, that gives you the opportunity to actually spend more as portfolios perform well, and the ability to tighten the belt when things are not going well, or maybe tapping into a war chest of cash that you have on the side to supplement, et cetera. That is a much more reasonable approach to having an extraordinary retirement through spending than having just a static 4%. Remember, the 4% rule was the worst case scenario, Nate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He did that and said, this is how did he, in the paper, this gave you like nearly 100% chance of never running out of money.
Yeah, I think it was out of 30-year rolling periods. He picked the worst rolling period there was, and they still didn't run out of money. And that's how they kind of came up with that rule. So which tells you, boy, there's room for an increase in spending there, right? And there's certainly ways that we can increase spending early on. But going back into what Greg was saying of the dynamic nature of it, is that we just don't think that you just take out a static number every single year, and let's be more dynamic in pulling spending forward. And I think that that's going to help. The other piece to this that I think ties into it is reliability versus variability of income. I have never met anybody that's that concerned about spending their pension check or their Social Security check.
Or their annuity income that they get.
Their annuity income.
The rental property income.
Because they know the very next month there's going to be another one of them. But a lot of this revolves around this nest egg that maybe is more variable in nature, that they're like, ooh, I don't know how, am I going to have another check as it goes up or down? Or am I going to run out of that money? And so understanding your preferences when it comes to reliability versus variability will also help you psychologically. For somebody that really has a deep embedded fear of the unknown and fear of running out of money, et cetera, yeah, we probably maybe want to work a little bit more towards the side of creating more reliability in income and consistent paychecks, because that's going to help that person spend when they know that they can't run out of it. But other people don't have as deep, a deep fear around that, and maybe they want a little bit more variability, or maybe you already have a really strong pension and Social Security and all these things. So it's just really identifying who you are, your belief system around that, and really understanding what really drives you in your ability to start pulling the trigger and spending to make sure you're positioned well in retirement to do it.
And here's the practical approach. So if you have $1 million and you're going to take a percentage of that over time to fund the majority of your retirement, maybe you have a small Social Security. How do you, and that is fearful that that's an income that could go away if you ran out of that money. How do you carve out a portion of that $1 million to create a reliable source of income that you're going to have a ton of confidence in? So what are some of the ways? Well, could you invest in a small business that had positive cash flow during your retirement? You could do something like that. Could you take some of your money and invest it in a rental property that creates positive cash flow that you can spend on a monthly basis? There are insurance products that are out there, annuities and certain things like that you can convert a lump sum into a pension, a private pension like stream of income. The more fearful, as Nate said, the more fearful you are of those things, the more you need to look at converting some of that nest egg into something that's reliable, that you will have the confidence to spend. If you don't have that fear, then that's not necessarily an approach, but that's something that is important in the planning process.
So here's what we need to do to wrap up. Let's talk about taking action, because that's really, at the end of the day, for somebody that's listening to this that say, okay, I get it. I identify with a lot of what you're saying, and most people do. it's time to take action. And one, the first thing I would tell you is it's really helpful to have somebody there coaching you along the way to help you with this, because doing this alone can be trying, because the minute you hit one hiccup, you go right back to reverting back to clinching on and saving. And so you need, a lot of times you need some help, some coaching through that. The other thing is that start small. Okay. I realize you might not be ready to plan out your next 15, 20 years or more of life and your spending plan, but you can start with 1 year, right? And it's not a bad thing to go out and try something. And if you end up saying, you know what, that's not how I want to spend my money moving forward, fine. At least you tried it. And then we maybe redirect those dollars to something else that you start having purpose around. But you've got to at least start somewhere. And I would say for those that are struggling and want to start to transition, let's start with a 1 year timeline of being intentional about your spending plan, and then let that start to create some momentum for you to build into it moving forward. So, And the last thing that I would say is just remember, take more ski trips.
Life is not a dress rehearsal. This is it.
Take more ski trips. And what SKI stands for, SKI, spend the kids' inheritance. Because if you don't spend it, they will.
I've never heard you say that, Nate. That's a new one.
I don't like to ski, though.
Yeah. You don't have to like to ski to take more ski trips. Just spend the kids' inheritance.
And if you really love your kids, you could spend your kids' inheritance on them.
That's right.
While you're alive.
That's
right.
A good one. Absolutely.
Yep.
We'll end on that
Absolutely.
one.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much. How do people get in touch with you if they have more questions?
Best way would be our website, designwealthadvisors.com, or you can call the office at 720-833-7676.
All right. Thank you, guys. And thank you for listening today. Please like, follow, and share this podcast with your friends. Until next time, I'm Wendy McConnell.